Welcome to my first race of 2025, my first international marathon, and one of the hottest courses I've attempted. Ever since I started running marathons, I knew I wanted to take this beyond just local races. Running is more than just a sport for me, it's a way to experience the world. There's something about moving through a city on foot, covering miles at a time, feeling the energy of a place in a way that's completely different from sightseeing. Every city has its own rhythm, its own challenges, and I wanted to start exploring them one race at a time. For my first marathon outside of my hometown, I chose Dubai. I had a few reasons to choose Dubai. First, it's one of the flattest marathon courses in the world, which meant I had a chance to run a strong race without worrying about tough elevation changes that I usually experience in my hometown, Vancouver. Second, it was a perfect stopover on my way to India to visit family, making the logistics work out smoothly. And third, while most marathon destinations in January are cold, Dubai is one of the few places where you can count on sunshine and warmth. But that also meant dealing with something I wasn't entirely used to, the rising temperatures as the race went on. There was also a fourth reason for choosing Dubai. I will get to that at the end of the video. The atmosphere at the start line was electric. I was way too excited, and that's something I should have managed better, but in that moment it was impossible not to get caught up in the energy. Thousands of runners all ready to take on the 42.2 kilometers, all standing together in the cool morning air, waiting for the race to begin. I reminded myself to trust my training, start steady, stay consistent, hydrate early, and most importantly, listen to my body. And then, exactly at 7 a.m. on the dot, we were off. The first stretch felt effortless, probably a little too effortless. I was going so fast, I was so excited. The palm trees were lining the road and the sun was slightly beaming through. I rarely ever see such beautiful sunrises because I'm not a morning person. I was just loving this moment. Just look at these views. My excitement should have been a sign to slow down, but in that moment, I didn't feel like I was pushing too hard. One of the things that stood out immediately was how well the water stations were organized. Every 2 kilometers or so, there were full bottles of water, not just small cups, but actual bottles. At first, I hesitated to take a whole one, thinking it might be wasteful, but as the race went on, I realized how much I needed it. The ability to sip water gradually instead of gulping it down at once made a huge difference. By 5k point, there was one U-turn. I was still feeling fresh at this point. The course was straightforward, the roads were smooth, and the energy of the runners around me kept me motivated. I could hear footsteps all around, some runners chatting, some locked into their own world, and me somewhere just in between taking it all in. Around the 12k point, I passed by the start line area again. The 10k was starting at that point. I was kinda jealous of the 10k runners. Around this time, I took my first gel. I wasn't thinking about the entire marathon yet, just getting through the first section as smoothly as possible. The sun was starting to make its way higher in the sky, but I was still protected by the shade from the skyline. I knew this wouldn't last forever. I kept reminding myself to drink small sips of water at every station to stay ahead of dehydration before the heat really set in. Around the 15k point, I started seeing Burj Khalifa at a distance. I knew getting that clear view meant that I'm not protected by the skyline anymore, but I kept moving on. At 17k point, they were handing out orange slices and bananas and a few more refreshments I didn't get my eye on. I figured I'd take a bite of each, whatever I get my hands on, but honestly, taking that orange slice was a big mistake. Almost immediately, I felt bloated and I knew I wasn't going to risk it again. So even though I saw a few more refreshments, I just stuck to my gels, as was the plan. By the halfway point, I could feel the temperature rising. It wasn't unbearable yet, but I knew that every kilometer from here on out would be harder than the last. Around this point, I realized a grave mistake I made. I was still feeling good enough that I accidentally ran my half marathon personal best at the 21k mark, and then at 30k mark I broke my personal best again. Pro marathoners would say that this was a grave mistake. I should have been more consistent with my pace. But I knew that the morning hours would be easier than the afternoon hours, so I went a little too fast in the beginning so that I cover more distance while the temperature is still not crazy high. The last 12K of a marathon are difficult anyway, whether or not it's hot. It's not just about speed or strength. These last 12 kilometers is where the difference between a runner and a marathoner becomes clear. Anyone can run a fast 30K, but what happens after that? That's where it gets real. Another thing that pro marathoners would say is 30K is the real midway point of a marathon, not half marathon. By 35K, I had no pace goal left anymore. The heat was full on, my legs felt like lead, and all I cared about was finishing. I had been drinking so much water that I had to stop for a washroom break, something I almost never do in races. But thankfully, the Dubai Marathon course had porta potties at like every 5 kilometers. In the last few kilometers, I saw a lot more volunteers with a lot more dates, donuts, a lot of other refreshments. In any other situation, that would have been the dream, but at this point, my stomach wanted nothing to do with food, or actually even water, but I kept pouring water on my head instead of drinking, even though I felt full. I could barely think straight, let alone chew. The last 2 or 3K felt endless. My body was so done, my mind was barely hanging on, and every part of me wanted to stop. But then I told myself just one step at a time. I can see the finish line. It was still far, but I knew once I got there it would be all worth it. I pushed through the last part, ignoring the exhaustion, using whatever I had left in me. Crossing that line felt so unreal. The heat, the struggle, the pain of those last 12 kilometers, it all disappeared for a second when I held my medal in my hand. I heard that there were food trucks at the finish line, but I so badly wanted to get out of that heat that I booked a cab immediately and I went to my hotel, turned the air conditioning to the lowest temperature possible to enjoy the final reason I chose Dubai as my first international marathon. Who has heard about these viral fixed chocolates? Well, it's been all over my TikTok. It's this kunafe flavored chocolate that everyone's been talking about. After the marathon, I couldn't wait to try it. The chocolate was rich, indulgent, and honestly the perfect post-race reward. I was so glad I saved it for the hotel room after a long day of racing.
This is better than I expected.
I had earned it, and it was everything I hoped it would be. A sweet ending to an unforgettable race. So that was my Dubai Marathon experience. It was tougher than I expected, but it taught me a lot about pacing, fueling, and pushing through when things get hard. It's a race I'll never forget, and I'm already thinking about what's next on this global marathon journey. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed.